Mike Portnoy is one of the greatest drummers alive. He has been called the closest thing to Neil Peart that exists in modern rock. He has worshipped Rush since he was a teenager. He has covered their songs, studied their catalog, and made no secret of the fact that playing with Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson would be the dream of a lifetime. And when Rush came calling for their 2026 reunion tour, they didn't call him. They called a German fusion drummer named Anika Nilles. And Mike Portnoy watched her opening night performance from home, glued to his screen, moved to tears by the tribute visuals for Neil Peart. And then he went on social media and said, "She absolutely killed it. She is the perfect choice from the man who could have wanted that seat more than anyone on earth." That is the story, and it starts with a drum throne that nobody was sure anyone could ever fill. Rush. If you need the introduction, Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, Neil Peart, the Canadian power trio that spent 5 decades redefining what rock music could be, complex time signatures, philosophical lyrics, a musicianship so demanding that every serious musician who encountered them came away changed. Neil Peart was the drummer. And calling him a drummer is like calling the Sistine Chapel a ceiling. He is widely regarded as the greatest rock drummer in history. Not the fastest, not the flashiest, the most complete, the most musical, the most intentional. A person who approached the instrument as a composer approaches a score. Every fill, every accent, every moment of silence, deliberate and meaningful. Peart died in January 2020 from brain cancer. He was 67 years old. His death effectively ended Rush. Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson had said, clearly, publicly, that Rush without Neil was not Rush, that the drum throne was not a position to be filled. It was a legacy to be honored. And then, in 2026, something changed. The 50-something reunion tour was announced. Rush would tour again, with a drummer. The question of who that drummer would be became one of the most discussed topics in rock music. Mike Portnoy's name came up immediately in fan discussions. Of course it did. He is the drummer of Dream Theater, one of the most technically demanding bands in progressive rock. He is a lifelong Rush devotee. He has the chops, the knowledge, and the personal investment that the role would seem to demand. But Portnoy himself made something clear: he never threw his hat in the ring. He described the drum throne as a sacred role. His words, sacred. And he said that only Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson had the right to decide who sat in it, that it was not his place to campaign for something that belonged, in the deepest sense, to them and to Neil's memory. That statement, from a drummer of Portnoy's stature, about a role he could reasonably have pursued, says something about the specific reverence that Neil Peart commands even among the people who could plausibly replace him. And when Portnoy later admitted he was genuinely relieved not to be asked, the reasoning was equally honest. The pressure, the scrutiny, the unavoidable comparison to a man who spent 40 years building one of the most documented and analyzed drumming legacies in music history. Every fill would be measured against Peart's version. Every deviation would be criticized. Every similarity would invite comparison. The trap of that role, for even the greatest drummer willing to take it, would be inescapable. Portnoy saw it clearly, and he was grateful someone else was walking into it. Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson chose Anika Nilles, a German fusion drummer, known within drumming circles as one of the most distinctive and technically gifted players of her generation. Known for her own original music, melodic, intricate, emotionally expressive, that sits at the intersection of jazz, pop, and progressive rock. Not a household name in the mainstream, not someone whose resume screamed obvious Rush replacement, which is, in retrospect, exactly right. Because the obvious choice would have come with its own trap. The drummer who was already associated with Rush-adjacent music, the one whose hiring would feel like a calculated commercial decision. Nilles was a choice that said, "We are not looking for someone who sounds like Neil, we are looking for someone who can honor what Neil meant while being fully themselves." She has spoken about the fear she felt approaching some of Peart's most iconic drum parts, about the weight of the responsibility, about what it means to play music that millions of people have specific, emotional, personal memories attached to. And on opening night in Los Angeles, she played it anyway. Mike Portnoy watched from home. He described being glued to YouTube and live stream feeds for the entire show. He described the emotional tribute visuals to Neil Peart bringing him to tears. And then he described Anika Nilles. He said she nailed Peart's most complex, iconic drum fills, the ones that have been studied and transcribed and attempted by drummers for decades. The ones that are not just technically demanding but emotionally specific, fills that carry the weight of the songs they live inside. She nailed them, with a giant smile on her face the whole time. That detail, the smile, is the one that landed, because the smile is not incidental. It is the difference between someone executing a demanding assignment and someone who is genuinely fully present in the music. Nilles was not surviving the performance, she was inhabiting it. Portnoy called her the perfect choice. Not a good choice, not a respectable choice, the perfect one. From the man who arguably wanted that seat more than anyone. That endorsement carries specific weight, because Portnoy is not someone who gives it lightly on this particular topic. Here is what this reunion actually represents for the people who have been carrying Rush's music since January 2020. Neil Peart died, and Rush ended. And the music that had been the soundtrack to so many lives, the albums, the tours, the specific feeling of being in a room where those three people were playing together felt like it was finished. Not archived, not legacy, finished. And then Geddy Lee and Lifeson decided, carefully on their own timeline with full control over who sat in that third position, that there was a way to honor what Neil built without pretending he could be replaced. By finding someone who wasn't trying to be him, who was bringing herself to the music, her own joy, her own mastery, her own smile, while treating his work with the reverence it deserves. Mike Portnoy cried watching the tribute visuals. Thousands of fans in Los Angeles cried too. The grief for Neil Peart is still real and present and alive in that community. And somehow, on opening night, that grief and that joy were in the same room at the same time, without canceling each other out. That is what Anika Nilles made possible. The 50-something tour has already expanded. The opening night demand was significant enough that Rush added dates. The North American run now sits at 23 shows. The response suggests that the appetite for this reunion was larger than even the optimistic projections. Mike Portnoy is counting down to the date when he can see it live in person. The man who watched from home, crying at his screen, wants to be in the room. Questions that remain open, whether the tour expands further, whether new music is possible, what the long-term future of this version of Rush looks like, belong to Geddy and Alex. They will answer them on their own timeline, as they have answered every major Rush question for 50 years. What is settled, at least for now, is that Anika Nilles has cleared the highest possible bar. The most demanding fan community in rock music has seen her play. The greatest living Rush-adjacent drummer has called her the perfect choice. The drum throne has a new occupant. And Neil Peart, by every account of everyone who knew him, would have wanted it to be someone who played with a giant smile on their face. Neil Peart once wrote that the measure of a life is a measure of love and respect. He spent 40 years earning both, in quantities that very few musicians in any genre have approached. And when Geddy Lee and Lifeson decided to bring Rush back, they did not do it carelessly. They took their time, they found the right person. They put the music in the hands of someone who treats it as what it is, sacred. Mike Portnoy, who has more reason than almost anyone to feel protective of that word in this context, watched Anika Nilles on opening night and felt relief and joy and tears. And then he told the world she was perfect. That is the review that matters most for a reunion nobody was sure could work. Rush is back. The drum throne is filled. And somewhere in Los Angeles on opening night, thousands of people who have been carrying this music through grief and time and the years since January 2020 got to hear those songs played live again. With a giant smile behind the kit. Let me know what you think.